you so much for joining us. I want to welcome Ronny LeJeune. She is force free, correct? Force free dog trainer.
Well, I don't identify with force free. I have some opinions about just like that terminology in general. So in general, I just
Okay.
call myself a positive reinforcement trainer.
Okay. Excellent. Yeah, and actually, that was the first thing I wanted to ask you was what's the distinction between say force free and R plus for you? Like, what is your differentiator there?
So because the concept of force is we can't be theoretically force free because like the common discussion is often said that the world has things that occur that stress out the dog, et cetera, that force
Hmm.
innately occurs. um, and I agree with that premise, not that I agree with using that in my training
Okay.
protocols. I just do not like using that as an identifying factor as a dog trainer because I feel like that doesn't identify exactly how I approach training. So my training, how I teach a dog, my procedures are based in positive reinforcement. I set
Okay.
forward to teach using positive reinforcement, and I do everything in my power to avoid implementing any type of force into my training. So
Okay.
that's the intentional use of force, right? But things happen. It just like it's just life, right? I'm not going to let a
Right.
dog run at the end of the leash and leash check itself, but sometimes it happens, and that's
Sure.
what it is. So I don't like to set myself on a slippery slope where people say, "Well, you can't be force free because this those contingencies does happen." And I do agree with that, but that's not how I teach, right? Because I'm not
Hmm.
intentionally using that to teach.
Excellent. I actually like that you make the distinction there because to me that is the one of the bigger issues I have with say the force free is to me it's I mean force is kind of a principle force if it is involved at all. You would much rather go about things a different way.
Right. I'm going to do everything in my power to avoid force, or essentially my thought process is I want cooperation from a dog versus compliance. And if I find myself at a crossroad that compliance is kind of required, then I start to really question um, what are the goals, what's the motivation behind the dog, all those kind of variables. So that way I could navigate myself more in a cooperation mindset than a compliance mindset.
Okay. Excellent. Now, the one thing, because I asked Tara this too, the one thing that surprised me about the video I posted was how many of you guys totally disagree with, say, Zach George. And so I asked her opinion on that. And so, in your own words, like, what is it that you fundamentally disagree with about why is Zach George not a good representative of what it is you do?
So positive reinforcement training as a whole has really changed. When people think of positive reinforcement, generally speaking, they're thinking of what I consider as the beginning stages of R plus when it just start to come into fruition, which was in response to traditional training to try to do the complete opposite of what traditional training is and to avoid the aversive application. But that form of positive reinforcement training still does use coercion. It still can put the dog in forceful scenarios. I don't agree with using things like extinction and any of things like that, which is where R plus has morphed into, is we like to call it R plus 2.0 if you're in the
Okay.
know of the concept.
Yep.
So the trainers who understand and embody the R plus 2.0 methodology is looking at things as more of a holistic view of the dog. So we not only are doing things from a teaching perspective that avoids aversive and control and compliance and all that kind of stuff, we're also looking at variables to make sure that the dog is biologically fulfilled, whatever that means for that dog. Medical, because we do know that medical compounds behavior. And a lot of training programs, when we're working with really complex behavior cases, most of the time they do have something medical that's contributing to what we're observing in that dog, whether that's pain
Hmm.
or a medical condition or both. So we address those things. Then we addressed physical stimulation and all these components, not just the training component. And R plus 1.0, in my opinion, not only do they are still quite seated in what I would consider old methods of training in positive reinforcement. Um, they are not doing much better than what I consider as poor training too. Because I get a lot of dogs that come from really poor positive reinforcement trainers, and I question
Okay.
what they were doing, because it doesn't make sense why, because it doesn't address what I need to address in that dog. So it's not often you come across a trainer like Tara and myself that really gets in the weeds of things to truly figure it out and get creative to do it in a positive reinforcement way without falling on that slippery slope of the compliance factor and all that.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for explaining that. So I know we're limited on time tonight. So there's actually one thing I wanted to we fundamentally disagree on that I wanted to touch on, and because I watched one of your videos and you had said you were responding to somebody and you had said that this issue was sort of putting the onus on the owner, and if the owner couldn't say get things correct with the dog, then the individual was kind of like blaming the owner. But it sounded like, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounded like you were basically saying that if you believe that the issue is with the owner, then you would lose all credibility. And so it seemed like you were placing more of the onus on the dog in terms of like the issues with the dog
No,
and not so much. Okay, go ahead and explain that for me
no.
better. Maybe I misunderstood you.
So that time, I know exactly what you're talking about. I made shirts about the little
Okay.
guy. That's great.
Yes.
So he was attacking one of my clients and blaming her dog's behavior on how she handles her dog. And
Okay.
I was never putting the blame on the dog, which the dog is going to be a dog, right? And how we
Mm.
deem the behavior as problematic or are okay with it is based on the individual who lives with that dog.
Yes.
Now,
Yeah.
this dog in particular is truly experiencing behavioral problems in the world and is actually a behavior case, should I say. And he was blaming what he was seeing in videos that she was posting of her dog just being a pet owner and trying to show people like their progression and how they're improving. He blamed the dog's responses on the owner. And
Okay.
I feel
Okay.
that's unfair as a professional to do so because dog owners are only doing the best that they can with the information that they know. They
I totally
can't do
agree.
any
Yeah.
better if they simply don't know.
Right. Right. Yeah. And I'm in complete agreement with you there. And it's up to us to guide them and educate them because the dog training world is such a confusing place to navigate. And so I don't blame people for being confused and for not understanding or you know because I guess the way I interpreted that was it just sounded like the if I have a behavioral issue, then it's not so much the relationship between dog and owner. It was more dog centric, which yeah, I would agree with you there. So I guess really then, because this was the biggest disagreement, say with me and Tara was, and you probably would disagree with this too, is I come from a an understanding of dogs where everything operates in a social hierarchy, and so dominance is very much it's a core part of my message and what I do and how I interact with dogs. And so when I think of cooperation, I think of it a little differently than say like a 50-50 um, back and forth with a dog. To me, cooperation would be rooted in if I'm playing the correct role with the dog, where say I'm the leader and the dog is the follower. Well, then there's a different power dynamic there than if the dog is my equal and we're moving forward, say in like a partnership.
Mhm.
And so if I and is that how you see things, where you're seeing it more as this cooperative effort on like an equal footing, or how do you look at that?
Yeah, I absolutely believe me and my dogs are equal partners in what we do. I don't view the world, or should I say, how I have my relationships with my dogs as a hierarchical situation because my dogs know that I'm not a dog. So
Mhm.
I don't know why I would engage in species specific behavior with a species that's not my own. Now, speaking of intraspecies dominance, like let's say human to human, we have a very social hierarchical dominant structure, but it's more of a pyramid,
Mm,
right? Like there's the
mm,
top point and there's the bottom pyramid concepts, right? But that is more of the concept of control and the social order of things.
mhm.
That's not the type of dominance we observe in dogs. I do agree that there is dominance, but that's just a fancy word for control in dogs, but it's
I
situational.
would
It's
agree with you,
not
actually. I would
linear.
agree with you. Yeah, I would totally agree with it.
Um,
That's what the word really, if you boil it down to one word, yeah, I think control would be the best way
it's just
to
it's
describe.
it's one
Yeah.
dog controlling access to a resource or territory or XYZ, but
Hmm.
it's not on a continuum that is consistent, like what we experience with humans. With dogs, it's very fluid. They could control space today, and tomorrow they might not, because today the space is important, but tomorrow it doesn't matter. So it's pretty fluid, and it could happen within multiple situations. So I don't agree that we have what we consider a group of dogs and they have a social pyramid. I don't agree with that. I do agree that dogs have interpersonal relationships and communicate with each other and tell each other, like, that's not allowed. I'm not going to allow you to do that. And then they control the space and access to the resources that they are trying to actively get, whether that's water, food, shelter, sex,
Hmm.
territory. So that occurs, but those are very situational because, like I said, there's times where the dog's like, I don't need that, so I have no means to engage in control. So at that point, is the dog dominant?
I think it is contextual, and so sometimes it is situational. I guess it wouldn't be dog dependent because I do find that there are just some dogs because dominance is a there are there aren't that many like truly dominant dogs, right? And there's such a spectrum of personalities, and I think of the way dogs organize themselves as, think of it like a ruler, and there are different notches in that ruler. You're gonna have different personalities that just naturally, like if you put a group of dogs together, they're just gonna kind of naturally fall in line somewhere, and they develop this
But
understanding, and it's they through play or through the way they communicate, this pressure they put on each other, you know, it could be through play, it could be through the control of something like food or territory or whatever. They're going to develop some kind of understanding of who's the stronger amongst them, and
but strength
that
has
can
nothing to do
change.
with dominance, though.
How would you what would you attribute it to
Strength
then? Because I
really,
think
it
strength.
truly doesn't, because it doesn't. It could actually be the self-preservation is a method to be safe and allow the other opponent to become a non-threat and they act upon what they need. So problem solving can be a form of dominance. So I don't think that using strength as a variable to quantify if a dog is dominant or not, or has the ability to can control, is what dictates them being dominant. So here's an example. I have two dogs. One's dog aggressive and the other is not. But if he feels like he has to protect himself, he will engage, and he's significantly bigger than my smallest dog.
Hmm.
So my smallest one, 55 pounds, he has the will to try to kill this other dog. But if he has a match that's bigger than him, he's going to get completely annihilated. So at that
Right,
point,
right.
would you consider my dog the dominant one because he is showing the desire to control, but the other dog is just reacting and responding to self preservation? That's not, so like you see how like that's not a good determining factor of what I would consider dominance.
Well, here's because, well, like I said, remember, think of it like a ruler, where you might have that one dog who, in comparison to another, may be more dominant. But you put a stronger dog than it in that group, and it's going to be dominant over the other two. And
But
so,
that context that I just gave doesn't mean that that dog was dominant. The dog was just acting on self-preservation because the other dog was engaging in conflict and control. The other dog's just like, I don't want to die. I'm bigger than you and I'm going to handle it. But that other
But
dog, the
you
motivation
would
for
agree
that
that not
behavior,
you would agree that not every dog's going to respond that way, though, right? There are dogs that are just going to give in, they're going to submit, they're not going to challenge back,
I'm
and
talking
so that
you
that
we're
you know,
talking about worst case scenario, and I'm trying to give a variable that proves against what you're trying to say. So in that context, yeah, of course, there's some dogs that would tuck tail and run. So yeah, the flight
sure.
response would come into play. But we're going to talk about a dog if we're going to consider strength as a variable for dominance. I could have a very strong, very large dog that is not seeking to engage in conflict or control with a dog that's significantly smaller that is seeking to engage in conflict and control.
Oh, sure. Yeah. I don't mean strength in terms of size. I mean strength in terms of the strength of personality, the mentality within the dog.
Okay,
So you
so
might have a
thank you. That
smaller dog that, yeah,
that's
yeah,
clear for me to understand what you're. I was thinking
yeah.
strength on a literal, like physical
No, no,
sense.
no. Yeah, because yeah, the size is irrelevant in terms of the mentality that lives within that dog. Like my dog is, she's a micro bulldog. She's 40, 45 pounds. And all the male dogs that come through here, she disciplines them. And most of them are a lot bigger than she is. And so that's, um, size to me is not a determinant of who's going to actually be the more dominant among two dogs. It's a personality that lives within that dog. I think it's important to make a distinction that like aggression and dominance are not, you know, a dog can be aggressive for reasons that don't have anything to do with dominance. Like you said, could be a medical thing. There could be, it could be rooted in fear or insecurity. But
What about
truly, like
genetics?
see, to me, that's like the last thing I ever even think about because I don't believe
Well,
genetics to be as important as,
this one. He is genetically dog. I mean, he's a pit bull terrier, so he is. That's
right.
like selectively bred for that. So if he's going to see a
I would,
dog and he feels like he needs to engage in that for that breed, I would say by definition, if we're following what your line of thought is, he would be considered dominant because he's going to engage in
right.
that regardless.
Sure. And that would be a dog that I would need to dominate in order to get under control. Not in a
Okay.
not yeah, so because I've many pit bull clients and that's the way I approach. If the aggression is rooted in it from a dominant place. I mean, really, no matter what dog I work with, I still need to I approach things from a social level. So whether I have an insecure dog who may be aggressing out of fear or I have a dominant dog who may be aggressive out of the will to dominate, I have to approach that on a social level as if I'm at the top at all times, but I'm going to handle each dog a little differently. The dog
But
who's more
you're,
dominant. Go ahead.
you go
Go
on.
ahead.
No, you
No,
finish.
yeah, I
I
was
was
going to
letting
say
you
the dog.
finish your thoughts so I could listen.
Sure. The dog is more dominant. I'm going to be a lot more rigid in terms of the structure I give, the discipline I provide, the rules and boundaries, and how consistent I am at enforcing those things. The dog that's more insecure, I'm going to focus more on, okay, I'm going to still give that structure and give the boundaries that's necessary, but I'm going to focus more on let's build some self-esteem within the dog. Let's build some confidence within the dog. Let's help the dog understand where it fits in within the group. Because a lot of that insecurity I find is it tends to be rooted in the fact that the human they live with doesn't give them clear instruction most of the time. The dog doesn't understand what to do. There's no clear direction for the dog. There's no guidance. And so that can leave a dog to be feeling uncertain and that can create anxiety. It puts a stress load on the dog because the dog then believes it has to kind of manage the group, and that's a position that the more insecure dogs don't want to take. The dominant dog is happy to live there because it's more naturally suited to its personality, and that's where you get the dogs that are very confident in their aggression. They control things and they have no problem. They're the ones that'll move forward. They'll bite. They'll attack. There's no hesitancy with those dogs, and that comes from a very different place. Like my previous dog was that way, where he's just whatever environment he went to, he wanted to be the biggest baddest boy on the block. So that was a very different thing than say my girl. She was the follower between the two of them, and so she would be the one to be scared in some situations, and he would be the one to say, "I'm coming here to wreck shop." So I had to handle them very differently.
I mean,
So
I have a dog that's done some serious damage, and I have not done any of those things. And as you could tell, we have quite the accomplishments, right? Um, so I don't like it kind of loops back to my original statement that our dogs know that we're not dogs. So I don't feel the
Yes,
need to engage in or like what how dogs could learn. I feel like that's necessary.
but we're all social
Because
creatures. But
regardless if right, but I'm not a canine. I'm not a candid. I'm
sure,
a
sure, sure.
so I could use my brain, which is significantly more to be able to think through how I could teach a dog, regardless of whatever spectrum they're on. So their spectrum could be rooted in fear, it could be rooted in anxiety, it could be rooted in actual true aggression. Um, Regardless of whatever spectrum that is, and if there's an overlap of that, there's a motivation to regardless of where they come from. So my goal is to figure out the motivation and build
Hmm.
incompatible behaviors. Because if I could teach a dog to disengage with a dog that he has tried to kill before and live in the same home without having to dominate him in any similar sense of the word, I know that I could teach using working with dogs that complicating using methods that develop cooperation versus control.
Actually, I'm gonna go with that for a second because this is kind of the crux of my of what I do and why I think this is so important. Is because you're right, we're not canines. However, socially, we all operate on a certain level, right? My dog is a social creature. I'm a social creature. Now, I can't communicate the same way another dog can, but the communication lines are the same in terms of the energy you put out, eye contact, body language, um,
Your eye,
the use
all
of
those are not
facial
the same
expression.
as another dog. Like it's not,
Not
it's truly
quite,
not
but
the same.
yeah, but
They
here's my point though:
understand what you're
is
doing. They understand body
yes,
pressure and release. Like I get that.
right,
Is it like that's just negative reinforcement. The dog is going to give in to something that they consider aversive, whether that pressure is your body pressure or any type of equipment that you're going to use for that pressure. What
sure.
I'm saying is if you're using those methods in the mentality of dominating, that's that that's not exactly correct in the sense of how dogs actually behave if you want to discuss truly social behavior and how dogs behave, because we
Well, I
are not
mean,
using body pressure how dogs use body pressure. We're not doing that.
I
even
would
even
argue
me,
we
if I
are. I would
body
argue we
block a
are.
door, no,
Yeah.
we're not. Okay,
Well,
I mean that's
but I look
fine.
at it this
I'm
way.
not on my
Look at it this
hands
way.
and
Like,
knees body blocking a dog is what I'm saying.
no, I'm not on my hands and knees. I just stand up. But I have many, many videos where I claim food from dogs, right? Because they have resource guarding issues. And
Okay, I
if I
have one of
engage in
those
a,
that would have put you into the hospital.
well, I've worked with many dogs. I have so many scars. It's not even funny. Um, but those, funny enough, those were from the restarts guarding dogs. But my point is I've learned from the dogs in terms of how they interact with each other. What are the principles at play? And so I have many videos on my channel where I'm working with sometimes even groups of dogs, claiming food, toys, bones from them, and I'm able to walk out the front door and those dogs not take that object, whatever it is, because now they understand it's mine. So if the dog truly didn't
Okay.
understand what I was communicating to them, then how could I go to a total stranger's house, claim the food from that dog in another way, or in a way that another dog would, when that dog would previously bite the owner or anybody involved trying to get that object? I could claim that food, walk out the front door, and that dog won't go anywhere near that thing. And I could give it to the dog and take it away, and it will no longer growl or will try to bite me or anything like that.
I guarantee that if you are walking into a home of a dog that's truly a resource guarding and you do that, you would absolutely get your rocked. I'm not going to say the word, but there are dogs out there that would absolutely send you to Jesus for that. And I've worked with those.
Sure,
And
yeah,
Corey's in
I
here
worked with
with
a
one of those
yeah.
that, no, I'm saying like a dog with a head that could actually put your head in his mouth, a
Sure,
kind of
sure,
situation.
yeah,
So if you would
yeah.
walk in a
No, that's
house
fine.
and do that, he would send you to an ER. So I
That it
think
doesn't really
it's
doesn't negate my point
dogs.
though. Whether the dog would or not doesn't mean that
It
the
does
communication isn't.
because
Not really.
It does, yes, because there are dogs out there that would never listen to that communication. So you're working, if you using that as a defining factor for your procedures to say that they work, then I'm saying you're working with dogs that are truly not going to escalate to that behavior with someone that's brand new entering the home. If you use startle responses and intimidation tactics, of course a dog that has confidence issues is going to tuck tail and run and not pay
Well,
attention to
it's
you.
not
But what
necessarily
are you teaching
intimidation.
the dog in terms of, it is, if you're walking
Not
into their
really.
safe place, yes, that's intimidating to a dog that actually has
Well,
confidence issues if
these are
if the
dogs.
resource guarding is rooted in that problem. If a resource guarding dog has issues with feeling like their resources are going to get taken away in terms of starvation or intimidation, then they're going to likely escalate to actually biting you.
You see,
I
I
mean,
hear this a lot
that's
though,
what
where
happens.
it's always about survival, and but here's the thing. If I have a group of dogs here, right? My dog, she makes it clear to all the other dogs that if they get near her stuff, she's going to discipline them. But I can get near her stuff all day long. She's not going to discipline me.
Because you're
But
not a dog. Dogs could have dog to dog resource guarding and not
but
dog to
but
human
that but
resource
it's
guarding.
okay. Let's break this down. If I go to someone's home and that dog is growling
I
at the
don't like
family,
how you're talking to me and thinking that you're going to tell me how to dog train. So if we're going to talk about theories, I think it would be
no, no, I'm
better
talking
for
about
us to
theory.
actually
I'm not talking
discuss
about
it.
theory. I'm talking about how
You're
dogs
talking about
operate, right?
you're ta-
I'm not talking
in
about
your
dog training.
anecdotal evidence. You
It's
are.
not
You're
anecdotal.
if
It's
you're
not
talking
anecdotal.
about, because you're talking about your observations and your observations are not actually
Okay,
rooted in fact because
how about
you're
a study then? How about a study? How about a study from the Messerly Veterinary Institute? It's veterinary medicine in Vienna, Austria. They did a study where they had lab raised wolves and lab raised dogs, and they raised these dogs from when they were puppies, or the both species. So it's like a multi-year study. And I went through this study on my channel. There's a video on there where I go through this. And the conclusion of that study was that, contrary to what they believed, wolves were the more cooperative species, and dogs formed strict linear dominance hierarchies. And in the conclusion of that study, they say this notion that humans don't fit into this social hierarchy, we should really re examine that, because that was not what they found at the end of this study. And their assertion was that we should re explore this idea because we very much seem to fit into this hierarchical nature, when especially living with another social species like a dog. So to say that just because I'm not a dog doesn't mean that these principles don't apply at all, because if my dog's willing to growl at me or a kid, or
do
if
you growl
someone's
back?
calling me up, no, but I
Like
assert
that's what
myself.
you sound like when you say, okay, by what? Shouting
It's
at
not
the
the same
dog?
thing though. No, 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 no. Well, sometimes projecting or raising your voice is warranted, but usually I'm not saying anything to the dog.
So here's my
It's
question
a
is, if a dog is growling, why are you not addressing the motivation for the growl instead of punishing the growl?
be- because usually the growl is coming from a dominant place, at least in the sense that
No.
the dog wants to control
So
the object.
so if we're
The
going to,
dog believes it owns
okay,
something.
so why won't you address why the dog feels like it needs to control instead of punish?
Here's my reason why the dog wants or feels the need to control things, is because the humans it lives with are too weak to communicate to the dog
You're
that it doesn't
training,
own that
you're
thing.
not, we keep coming full circle to a lot of the points you brought up previously, because you
Yeah.
mentioned that you don't agree with blaming the owners and you just blame the owners.
No, I don't agree with blaming the owners in the sense that um, they didn't understand what led up to that the sequence of events that led up to this behavior problem. They were unaware of. It's not their fault. When I step in, my job is to educate them about the dynamic they've established and how it's incorrect. And if the communication that they're giving to that dog is not clear and is not effective and it doesn't make sense to the dog, then you're going to create issues unknowingly, something like resource guarding, or the dog is going to perceive you a certain way where it believes it owns the environment. It owns the couch, it owns the toys, it owns the food. Therefore, it's going to growl at the people it lives with. It's going to bite them. It's going to assert itself because it believes it owns everything. It's a control issue.
My question to you, do you think that my dogs run around my house growling at me because they believe they own my couch, they own the food, they own
Well,
this house, they pay
I
my
never said your
bills?
dogs did. I never said
No,
your dogs did.
but no, but this is an actual question because you're saying that this is what when they don't hold the boundaries that you're saying that is necessary to teach dogs, and I have
Hmm.
said that I don't adopt that. My question to you is, do you believe it to be true that because I don't hold dominance theories as a principle in my training, that my dogs are actually running around holding a dominance over the couch. They're growling and trying to bite me for who knows what in this house. They pay my bills, they clean the house. Like, do you
Sure.
believe that to be true since I
Well, no,
don't
like I said, not
embody
all
that?
dogs are dominant, right? Here's the way I see it.
So you're making an
Most,
assessment that my dogs are not dominant? That's not the question. That's not
no,
the
no,
question I asked.
here's what I'm saying. First of all, I've not seen your dog, so I don't know. But generally speaking, most dogs that people own, they're going to have good lives. They're not going to have any problems, with the exception of maybe pulls on the leash or whatever. But the people that call me, the issues they have is, hey, my dog's aggressive over X, Y, and Z, or my dog's reactive on a leash, or my dog won't let me take food from it because it wants to bite me, or my dog is fighting with the other dog, or my dog wants to kill the cat. All these issues that are of an aggressive nature, that's why people call me. And so when I show up to assess the situation, usually the assessment involves, hey, this is the style of communication that you're engaging in, and this is why the dog is doing this, because the lines of communication are fucked up. And if we come from a place, people have the society we've created, right? People come from this place where they think love and affection is all a dog needs, and that's the ass backwards way of looking at it, because we're dealing with a predatory animal who see things in terms of strength and weakness. So if I if I come at the average owner comes from that place where they think petting the dog all the time and giving it what it wants and spoiling the shit out of it is the right thing to do. Well, it's no wonder the dog sees them as weak. And now we have to undo all that. And the whole structure of things needs to be rearranged. So that way we're putting affection last. That's the last thing you do. It's discipline that needs to come first now, because that's usually the thing that's missing is boundaries, discipline, structure, direction, leadership. There's no lead. There's nothing. None of that's involved. And so I have to show up to show those people how to do that to get things back on track, moving forward to where we can permanently get rid of these issues, and the dog and the owner can have a good relationship.
Okay, so do you think I do not establish boundaries? I do not do any of those checklist things you said because my dogs are highly predatory. I have a very intense pit bull terrier, and I have a German
Mhm.
short hair. And his natural range is at least 200 yards away from me when we off leash hike. So, based off of these variables you've given me, I'm curious because it seems like you hold that really strongly. Um, if you assume that individuals like myself who train very differently, that our dogs don't have that in place, and do you assume that our dogs are actually out in the public causing not only safety hazards to themselves and to others?
I don't assume anything, but when one issue I have is, say, with like the TikTok format, is it's not long form enough to really for me to really make a conclusion. I can see bits and pieces of things that look good, but I have no idea the truth of the matter.
Why
You
do
know,
we
like
have to why do
I
we have to why do we have to use my TikTok videos? I'm just generally asking as a person. You invited me here, and I'm
sure.
asking, do you assume based off of my what I would hope that you would know that my accolades, my experience, as well as what I do professionally would signify that I am not a beginner at this. So I want to be clear is, do you believe that someone like myself and the dogs that I own as well as teach do not live up to the standard that you are presenting, or that we are somehow not holding our dogs to a high criteria of behavior because we do give love and affection because I don't believe in deprivation tactics.
Well, it's not deprivation tech. Do you see dogs petting each other
Yeah,
when they're in the same room? Do dogs go around petting each other and giving love? They don't operate that
dogs
way.
actually do cuddle and show each other affection.
They show
They don't pet
supplication. They
each
don't.
other.
They don't. They don't pet
They
each other.
pet dogs. I never said pet. I said they do show affection and they will cuddle with each other. Dogs do form individual bonds with one another. That is true. So I'm talking about
Mm.
my form of affection. You don't believe that dogs form
No,
bonds with each
they
other?
form bonds. They form bonds, but I don't think the concept of love. I don't. I'm not
I
sure
never
that a
said
dog.
love either. I said affection.
Yeah, affection. Yeah, but I've never seen dogs will get near each other, but I've never seen like this cuddle.
You never had dogs
Um,
like hang out with each other cuddling on the couch? That's crazy work.
they're near each other, but I wouldn't say they're cuddling. They're are they in proximity?
And
Yeah, but
that's still a social behavior of sharing affection. That truly is.
sure.
That's
Yeah, but
part
I
of social behavior.
like if I see a dog go up and lick another dog on the face, to me that's more of a supplicative behavior. Rather, that's more of a show of respect rather than love, right? We
And
interpret that as
why
love,
are we talking
but
about licking? I'm still talking about giving my dog attention and affection. You said attention and affection was
no,
last on the continuum of
last on
what
the
you
list.
provide to
Last on the
dogs.
list, yeah,
Right.
yeah.
I remember that. So I'm saying I'm opposite. I give all my dogs as much as they want when they want it because I love my dogs and I do believe that we have a partnership. That and I'm trying to understand is if you truly believe that my dogs don't have boundaries and they don't have behaviors that live up to a specific criteria based off of their motivation and predatory sequence and all of these variables that you're mentioning. I'm just trying to see is how you're viewing me as a professional because what you're talking about now makes me feel like you brought me here to lecture me about how you train dogs.
No, I don't. Well, first of all, I don't train dogs. Second of all, I brought you here to
You well
debate
then you just
because
said a bunch of dogs go into your home. Debating means we bring points to
no,
each
no,
other and we discuss
no. Listen,
theory.
listen. I make a distinction on my channel between training and behavioral issues, right? Training is building skills in the dog, and the behavioral issues are socially related. So I don't train dogs because I don't build skills in dogs. I solve behavior problems.
Behavior
So to me,
modification is training.
it's not training to me. To train when
It
you go get
is.
a job
Well,
and they train you
your
on the job, is that not
opinion,
skill related?
if they train me on the job,
If I go get a job and they train me to do the job, they're giving me the skills necessary to do the job, but that has no bearing on my the level of respect I have for the boss, whether I respect my coworkers and my attitude towards the job. They're two very different things. So when I
you're
training for a
talking about
dog to
behavior
me,
modification and respect.
yeah, but that's not
What we
training.
just
That's
jump
not training.
ship
That's
to
a
two different
social.
things.
I'm
Behavior
making a
modification
distinction.
is still training. Classical
Not for me.
conditioning
Not
is
for me.
changing
That's
the
yeah. I don't
well,
see it that way.
we're not going to argue opinions on verifiable facts. Like that's just
Well,
verifiably proven.
well, to me, this is a problem with the dog training world. Is people label everything as training, but behavioral issues are like if I look at
It's
things from a
called
hierarchical
classical
perspective.
conditioning.
Yeah, and to me, I don't live in that world. Conditioning with Pavlov, Skinner, I don't. The four quadrants to me it's bullshit. I don't live there.
You
To me, everything is
this is
socially related. Like you
this
can
is
train a
crazy.
dog. You could train a dog with the positive reinforcement, build skills in it. I won't argue that all day long. Like especially of course what you do, you've been successful in that. I won't deny that. What I'm saying is behaviorally, if I have a behavioral issue,
I work with
that
behavior
is
cases too.
okay.
So I need to be
And
very clear because everyone
yeah,
thinks because I'm a very good sports trainer and I do fitness training that I don't touch hard cases. Most of my private clients are really incredibly hard behavior cases. So I
I
want to
never said they
question
weren't.
what would you do? What would you do with a dog that is has generalized anxiety that cannot go into public without having a meltdown and
Hmm.
cannot eat food without sending the dog into starvation deprivation contingencies? How would you work with a dog like that?
What is the anxiety rooted in?
You know what? You have to tell me. I'm asking you how you would handle something like that. Why are we
Okay,
asking me the questions?
let's say hypothetically. Well, no, because it's important to make a distinction between a dog who's anxious for one reason or another. If I have a dog, typically the anxious dogs I
Do
work
you
with,
know
it's
what generalized
because,
anxiety means? Like it's an actual diagnosis.
well, I'm just saying anxiety in general. If I have a dog who's stressed the fuck out and anxious, it's usually rooted in insecurity. And that insecurity comes from the fact, again, like I said, that the humans are not giving that dog what it needs. And so it creates uncertainty in the dog. It puts a stress load on the dog. The dog's social needs are not being met, right? So, okay, let's go back to this hierarchy, the hierarchical way of that dogs organize themselves. If that dog believes it has to be in the driver's seat when that dog is not suited for that job, it puts a stress load on that dog. It's going to make that dog anxious as fuck. And that's usually where separation anxiety comes from, because the people that that dog believes it has to manage walk out the door, that dog freaks the fuck out. But if we rearrange everything and we realign everything to where that dog now understands, hey, I don't have to control anything because the people that I live with
What are they
have shown
what
me
are they
what
trying to control?
everything.
What is a dog with generalized anxiety trying to control when they're having a panic attack?
It's contextual. That's a contextual question.
No.
Yes, it's a
Generalized
contextual
anxiety means
question.
that anxiety occurs when the eyeballs open. It doesn't matter where the dog is,
But where did that
the
anxiety come
anxiety
from?
occurs.
Where does it come from
I'm
though?
asking you, how would you deal with that? Because you have yet to give me the
Okay,
answer because I know the
no, no.
solution.
I have a border collie on my. I had a border collie on my channel just like 3 weeks ago, where it had this anxiety you speak of, especially in car rides. Right, it would get in the car, it would create puddles of drool, stress the hell out, and
Okay.
I fixed
That's
that in
it.
six
We're
and a
I
half
don't know why
hours
we're going
because
into your exam in 6.5 hours.
6.5 hours,
Please.
and I have
I
video
asked
proof.
you a question and you're giving me your own example. This
Well,
you're
you asked
keep
me how
going
I deal
back
with
and
it. I've dealt with it. I've dealt with it. I've fixed these
you
things.
didn't deal with a case like mine and you can't fix it in six
Okay, so now
hours.
this is a pissing contest now. Is it? Well, I thought
No, you can't.
you
I
wanted to
because you
accuse
don't.
me of.
No, because you didn't answer my question. You
Well, I
gave a
did though.
different no, you gave a dog that was in a car that was showing drooling. The dog likely had what's it called? Motion sickness. I'm
No, this
talking
dog
about a
was
dog with
also
actual confirmed
this dog was
generalized
also
anxiety disorder, GAD.
well. Again, if I have a dog who's anxious, stressed out, right? Because we can see what that looks like in a dog. You know, it panics, it's whining, it can't sit still, it's uncertain, it's insecure, it's not confident, right? And any environment you take it in, that could show up in a defensive
The
way. Like
dog
this
is
dog was
like
very
that the minute it
defensively
wakes
aggressive.
up.
Yes, and I would say because that dog has not been given socially what it
So
needs in terms
you're
of
blaming the
structure,
owners
discipline,
again.
boundaries. I'm not
You're
blaming the
not
owners. The
under
owners don't know any
you
better.
are. Well, you
No,
are.
no.
You're saying that they're not giving boundaries for a dog with anxiety, which is
I'm not
crazy.
blaming the owners, but I'm saying the owners
When
are
you
the
experience
reason. The
anxiety,
owners are the reason.
you need
Yeah.
boundaries to calm down?
Okay. If you go to work, right, and let's say you're thrusted into the leadership position, and you know nothing about that role, is that not going to create a lot of anxiety for you?
Why are you assuming that the dog is taking a leadership role by simply opening its eyeballs in the home that it lives in?
Because if the dog, again, if dogs they see the world in terms of a hierarchy, and nobody is
The
establishing what that
dog knows
hierarchy
that
is,
you're not a dog.
yeah, but again, we're all social
Does
creatures.
the dog why does the dog want to dominate this house? Why does the dog want the couch? Why does the dog want the refrigerator? Why does the dog want the front door? None of this makes sense. So we're going to talk in circles. It comes
Well,
down to you are very much a
I gave you a
dominance theory.
scientific I gave you a scientific study that demonstrates my point, and the alpha theory people think was debunked was not actually debunked. So the
We
whole
never talked
basis
about
of which
alpha theory. And we talked
no, but
about
what I'm
dominance
saying is
earlier and how I said I don't
yeah,
believe it's linear. You do. So let's conclude that you're in
yeah,
the
because that's
dominance
what the
theory
dogs
spectrum and
believe.
I'm not.
That's what the dogs believe.
Really, yeah, because I'm here in Twilight, with all these, these fake accolades back there. But that's just crazy for me.
Well, again, this
Um,
isn't a pissing I don't know why you're making this a pissing contest, because I have a clean five
because
star record on my thumbtack profile. Like I've yet to fail with a client, so I don't know what your point is. You have trophies, but I have successful clients, so it's like whatever.
you don't think I have successful clients?
I don't know. Your TikTok is very clipped up and looks good for social media, but I don't know. Like, do we have
Why are
reviews? Do
you
we have
basing
testimony? Do
my
we?
resume? Why do I need that? I have
Well, you're the one
plenty of
pointing at
clients
your
right now.
trophies and everything. I'm just trying to have a
Because you
discussion here
came
between
here to try to tell me about things and you're like diverging from the questions I'm asking you. And it's really
Well, this
frustrating
is a
because it's not
debate,
truly a
right? This is a debate.
conversation. A debate means that I bring up a question and you answer the question that
I
I'm
did
asked
answer the question. How did
directly.
I answer?
And
Okay,
no,
let's
you
let's go back to
didn't.
the
You
question.
because
How
you're
did I not
going
answer the question?
into different examples that divert from the question that I asked.
How so?
And
You
you're
asked about a dog
continuing
with
to loop
anxiety,
back around.
and I'm
You're
telling you how I
continuing
would
to
address
loop
an
back
anxious
around.
dog. And I even
You
gave an example
didn't.
of a
You
dog on
just
my
give
channel who had anxiety, and I fixed it in 6.5 hours.
you can't so you can't fix anxiety. You can't.
Yes, you
That's
can.
the
Yes,
thing.
you can.
How do you
Yes, you
fix
can.
the CNS?
Any dog that has anxiety, I don't care what the diagnosis is. If I have an anxious dog, I'm going to give structure. I'm going to give direction. I'm going to establish boundaries. I'm going to give that dog the leadership it's not getting, so that dog can we can build self-esteem in that dog. That dog has a certainty of the
What
world.
is leadership?
I'm telling you what it is. Leadership is
You just like
telling that
helicopter the dog?
no, I don't believe in say punishing a dog like these dog trainers do. I don't do that.
You
No,
mentioned punishment earlier.
no, that's what people would label punishment. But me claiming dog from a food isn't punishing it. That's establishing who
That
controls
is
what.
punishment. That's
That's not
removal
punishment.
of a reinforcement. Yeah, that in the
Okay, so when
continuum
so
of
when a
operant
dog takes
conditioning. But
dog
you
when
don't
so
know that. So
when
how do
my
we
dog well yeah,
debate
because the
that?
four quadrants to me is like I don't live in that circus world. If my dog takes
You
food
live
from
in a
another
different
dog,
circus for sure.
is that dog punishing another is my dog punishing another dog by telling it not to get near her shit? Is that a punishment?
Yeah,
Or is that
yeah,
communication? Is that a dog establishing
both.
dominance? Okay,
Yes,
good. Yeah, but it's a social thing. Like if you went out to your car in a parking lot, and you saw somebody trying to break into it, and you assert yourself towards that person or call the cops or something, and they apply a consequence to that individual, are you punishing that individual?
yes,
Is it a necessary consequence?
yes.
Okay,
For them,
so
but I'm not.
right.
But
I would agree
someone
that
breaking
the
into my
consequence,
vehicle and getting
yeah,
a
it's a violation
consequence
of
via
of
a
ownership.
ticket, yeah, where they
Yes, and
pay
so
money.
so when a dog
So you're
tries to take her shit, that she's issuing a consequence in the same way, saying back off my stuff, that's mine,
yeah,
and that dog needs
dogs
to
do
respect
that to
that.
each other. So
Yes, yes.
when a dog growls for something that you try to take something, you bite it. You growl and you bite it.
No. You are misconstruing me saying that I apply the principles of what a dog do for I don't do exactly what a dog
So how do
does.
you correct it? What you just do? What do you do?
I don't correct it. I step in and I get into a power struggle with the dog. This is the nature of it, right? This is how we
We
establish
getting into a
we
power
we
struggle?
get
This
into a
is
power
wild.
struggle.
It's
Yeah.
7, so it was great, my guy. Bye.
Oh, guys, that went about how I thought it would with Ronnie. I didn't think it would be as cordial with Tara, to be honest with you, or as cordial as it was with Tara. Let's read the chat here. Let's see. Yes, yeah, that was my honest opinion. Was I didn't think this would go as well as the conversation with Tara. But so I don't know. Corey's are you from her neck of the woods? Yeah, Rach quit. Yeah. Well, she did. In fairness to her, she did say she only had till 7 o'clock, but that's why I wanted to get right into it. But appreciate you, Loyal, for showing up. Appreciate you, Ryan, for showing up. I know I was gonna make an announcement, but um, like last time, she didn't really respond to my email, and so I just assumed we were on, and so I didn't want to make any announcements because I wasn't sure. But yeah, yeah, I don't know. Very interesting. I didn't want to have it, guys. I did not want to have a pissing contest. Right, that wasn't the route that I wanted to go with this, but it seemed like that's the route she wanted to take it. Anyway, hey, It was still fun. I like a good back and forth. Who else showed up here? What do we got? Milspec, what's up, man? Well, Milspec, here's the thing. It's not a semantics thing for me. There's a big distinction. To me, it's an important thing to distinguish training from behavioral issues because they're not the same thing, right? You don't train behavioral issues. You behavioral issues come from a different place. If that's a social issue, then I have to address that on a social level. I don't address it using science or four quadrants or training. Training is, um, if I train like a service dog, I'm building skills in that dog. If I train a gun dog, I'm building skills in that dog. If I train um, a bomb squad or like a drug sniffing dog, I'm training skills in that dog. It has nothing to do with the behavior or say the how well adjusted that dog is to its peers or its handler or anything like that. Who's still here? Well, guys, I got to go myself. We had originally agreed 7 o'clock, so I guess that's what it is. That was fun. Anyway, you guys let me know what you think in the comments, and we'll see if we can get anyone else to do this.